What we're going to do today is to talk about the fundamental principle for your success in communicating with anyone, especially your spouse, which is most important because how you get along with your spouse makes a difference in all other areas of your life. Okay, so think about one fundamental thing that is essential to all communication. And in building any building, jumping to analogy here, is the foundation. When you build a house, you have the foundation. When you build a large building, you set the foundation first. And one way you can know how large a building is going to be is how deep the foundation goes, is the higher the building will be built. So that's the same way in relationship, is the deeper you build your foundation, the better your relationship can grow. The foundation of all communication tools is safety. So if we take as our foundation safety, that's an important principle to think about. And so when you're talking with your spouse or anyone and they begin to defend themselves or feel like they have to explain, and you find yourself being interrupted, you can know right off that they are not feeling safe because they're feeling judged and not understood. And so that's where the defensiveness comes in, and that's often the beginning of many fights or disagreements, whatever you want to call it. It just goes south from there. So that's a good time to back up and ask yourself and ask them and discuss, how can we make it safe? So understanding that principle, then I want to move to the next part of that helps build safety. The thing that builds to safety is being on the same goal. Okay? Or you can say the purpose or why. Why are you talking in the first place? Now we often assume that this is understood. Why are we talking? And yet, so many times, the purpose or what the goal is lost. And so it helps to verbalize that out loud. Talk about what is the goal, the purpose, and the why. So once you have that, then the next part is the process. And that's the how you talk about that. Okay, so we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the process. The process is the structure, and that comes from the physical structure, and then also is the emotional structure. The physical structure might be whether you're standing in the kitchen talking, or you're sitting down talking, or you're on a walk. Hand in hand, walking down the street is a lot different than standing in the kitchen face to face. Like that. Just that physical structure creates a lot of safety or a lot of intensity. And so changing the physical setup of where you're at creates a lot of safety. And so if you find yourself having difficulty, then change the setting. Many times I know couples, when they first meet, they'll meet at a restaurant because there's a crowd around, it's safe, there's protection in numbers. And that's a wise thing when you first meet someone. As you begin to trust more and you feel safe, then it's easier to get in more and more intimate and private settings. Coming to my office, having a person there to referee and coach how to communicate, that creates safety for a lot of couples. Many times I've heard couples come in and say, okay, we have something we talk about, that we had to wait until we came to the office so that we could have help with that, because it's so easy to get back into routine in the old patterns of arguing. And so having someone there to intervene and interrupt the normal pattern. And that's the principle, is that you want to interrupt your normal patterns of communication. So one fun way of changing the process, and I tell guys to do this a lot because oftentimes, because men are larger, there's a lot of physical threat without intention. And even if it's not believed that way, there's this subconscious feeling of safety. When a man gets intense, wanting his wife to hear him, if he will just sit on the floor all the way down and sit on the floor and talking, that creates a lot of safety. And it breaks a pattern, for sure. So you're talking to your wife and you sit on the floor, so what are you doing? And changing that pattern allows your wife to feel safer physically, and there's less threat with that. Also, it reminds the person sitting on the floor that needs to be aware of the tone of your voice and language. And so that's another part of the process, is the tone you use. And so it's important things to be aware of is how you speak, whether you're talking really fast and that's working okay sometimes, or you need to go slow and get into the feelings and take the time. One thing we know is that when the heart rate goes up 100 beats a minute, that the cognitive brain begins to shut down, and we're not going to be thinking or talking as logically. And so whatever it takes to be more relaxed is important as well as part of the structure. So in our minds, we need to be calm and be calm, whether that's just through thinking and making sure our heart rate is slower, or sitting down and creating that physical structure. Now, I want to share briefly what works best for me and my wife, and what we've discovered, because my wife is very into doing things, getting things done. Because I'm a counselor, I'm used to really getting into feelings and talking, and it's easy for me to get distracted and difficult for me to multitask. And so my wife is really good at both of those, multitasking and doing many things, and processing without too much feeling. And so what works best for us is to go on for a long drive. She will drive, that'll keep her busy at one level and able to hear me formulate my words, because I don't have all the words for the emotions as quickly as she wants them. Because she's busy driving, she's able to be more patient with me, which allows me to be more open and communicate more. And it's always a great time when we can take a long trip and do a serious inventory, because we can talk about the details of things that we want to improve in our relationship. So that's part of the process of doing that. Of course, all the different communication tools that I'll be sharing with you are different processes. So different processes are the way that we communicate, whether that's sitting face to face, side by side, going for a drive, going for a walk. Those are, as I've said, different processes. And also the way in which you take turns to communicate. So one fun way, and Dr. Stephen Covey talks about, he learned from the Indians, is where they would have a big stick, and they called it the talking stick. So you can have a talking stick, or you can just grab a marker or a pen and say, this is the microphone. And one way to set the process before you begin is to set the rules and say, this is the talking stick, and the person who has this is the person that gets to talk. And so that person says all they want to. When they're done, then they pass it, and it's the other person's turn to talk also. And so that's one way of taking turns. And I'll be sharing more in other programs, more of different ways of doing that. What I want to conclude before we take our break is the final point, and that's the content here. And that's the what we talk about. And you can take any topic when you have the safety, in the foundational thing of safety in place. Then you remind each other of what your goal is, and then you agree on what the process works best for both of you in talking. And then the content is whatever you want to talk about. Now, The important thing is, if you're talking and you begin to argue or disagree or begin to interrupt each other, you need to stop. It's not working. And go back and review what the structure is, what the purpose and why, and make sure what you need to do to keep it safe. So that's the most important thing. And having all that in place, just remember each of these in whatever conversations you're having, and you'll have a successful conversation with whomever you want about any topic when you create enough safety and you both agree what the goal is and the process.